This clip is brought to you by SaveWithConrad.com.
Eddie has always wanted to be a pro wrestler his whole life. Instead of a jungle gym, he had a wrestling ring in his backyard. He didn't get to watch his father wrestling in his prime, but he watched him toward the end, and Eddie still felt that excitement. His family didn't pressure him to enter the business, but he felt the pressure of the Guerrero name. And because of that, he always strived for excellence. And it's interesting to find where someone's inner drive comes from. Do you think that this family pressure and this reputation is something that really pushed him to excel at the level he did? I mean, he's going to overcome a lot of obstacles in his career, and we're going to cover a lot of them today. But is this just instilled in him as a young person?
I think it was instilled. I think it was genetic more than anything. I think that you look at Eddie Guerrero, and Eddie Guerrero knew what he wanted to do from the time that he jumped out of his mama's body and said, I want to wrestle. His brothers, all wrestlers, his father, one of the greatest of all times. And Eddie looked at this as his life calling. And I don't believe that Eddie ever had any consideration to do anything else with his life. So yeah, it just was genetic in this case, and that Eddie was wired to be a wrestler.
Let's talk about what could have been. Eddie actually gets a wrestling scholarship at New Mexico Highlands University, but he got hurt, so they redshirt him. By the time he recovers, the program is actually shut down. So he doesn't get to finish and go straight into training professional wrestling. What do you think could have been had Eddie actually had the opportunity to pursue amateur wrestling?
I think that Eddie probably would have been at the top of the amateur wrestling game, maybe even going to the Olympics. But thank God that didn't happen, and Eddie was able to start to focus on his calling for the rest of his life, which was professional wrestling. And Eddie was going to be the best at it because his last name was Guerrero.
At the time, Eddie's best friend was a fellow named Art Flores, who was his bodyguard Spider in the LWO that I'm sure some of you remember from WCW. Flores and another friend named Hector, Hurricane Hector Rincon, trained with Eddie as he initially learned professional.
Rincon. Am I going to have to correct your, do we need Dave Silva on this show just to translate our hillbilly asses and fucking correct Mexican pronunciations?
This was just after his father had experienced a stroke and thus could only guide his son and not physically participate as much. Eddie has practiced wrestling with his brothers his entire life going into this training, so he pretty much understands the basics, and he takes a lot of the influence from his family style. But Chavo Sr. was his biggest influence. Is this why you hear so much about second generation wrestlers? Because they just grow up sort of immersed in a business in a way that someone who was an outsider couldn't really understand?
Yes. I think that if you're born into this business, you're born into a very unique culture that, especially during the time that Eddie was growing up in the 70s, secretive and protected to the point that even within your own home, there was a lot that was unknown. So for Eddie, you know, he sees this mysterious world that his brothers are in, his father is in, his mom is in, and he too wants to be in, but even at that young age, still wasn't smartened up to the point of understanding the ins and outs of the business.
So Guerrero begins his wrestling career as Mascara Magica in EMLL Impresa Mexicana de Lucha Libre. Negro Casas, El Dende, and Atlantis were the wrestlers he described as his biggest influences early on. He leaves the company in 92. He's not happy with his push. He's going to go for a bigger paycheck with AAA, which at the time is more like an outlaw promotion. And even though his gimmick was popular, EMLL owned the rights to the character. So Guerrero then appears on a televised AAA show as that same gimmick, only to unmask himself along with the aid of his tag team partner that night, Octagon. AAA, it feels like, has been around forever and ever, but we know that's not exactly the case. They were sort of the young upstart, if you will. What do you remember about the differences between those two promotions? Because you're probably more familiar than maybe some of the other areas of the country because you're right there in Texas.
Well, AAA was something that was similar to WWE in that EMLL was more traditional, and then AAA came in and they were flamboyant. They had the great ring entrances, and they focused more on character and stories and things of that nature. That was different. It was a different presentation than what the audience had been used to. So it was, in some cases, it was looked down and kind of frowned upon. In others, it was people looking at it going, wow, we've never seen this before.
Right.
So it's the more flamboyant of the two promotions, in my opinion.
Negro Casas goes to Japan and takes Eddie with him in 93, and his brothers scare him into thinking he needed to be in super shape. So he's running 3 hours a day in the desert to get ready. And he meets Chris Benoit, who actually knocks him out in their very first match. And he describes Chris as his best friend. He also meets Finlay in New Japan. And of course, we know these relationships last far beyond this initial Japanese run. He starts wrestling as Black Tiger #2 while in Japan. And according to
the correct pronunciation would be Black Tiger Dos.
Black Tiger is a wrestler trained. This is according to the storyline. Black Tiger is a wrestler trained and sent by a Yakuza-like organization called the Tiger's Cave. And the Tiger's Cave desired vengeance upon the wrestler Tiger Mask, a former trainee of theirs, for publicly turning his back on them and no longer paying them their monetary tributes. So Black Tiger is the antagonist here. And Eddie wasn't originally going to don the mask and identity, but some changes led to him being given the mantle. And this storyline was directly derived from an anime video series that ran from 68 to 71 titled Tiger Mask. Bookers licensed the work and created characters based on it. This is kind of fun. Is this something that happened a lot as far as you know, that as far in Japanese wrestling, I mean, they pulled characters right out of anime?
I don't know what the fuck they do in Japan.
Well, I'm just saying, like we've heard before that Vince McMahon, goddamn, I want a Mighty Mouse. Is this sort of the same type of deal?
Who the fuck would want a Mighty Mouse and a Tiger Mask if you got Mighty Mouse? If you got Mighty Mouse, do you need a Tiger Mask?
Oh God, it's going to be one of those days. Eddie becomes even more successful upon his return. He wins the 96 Best of the Super Junior tournament of junior heavyweights, where he faced Jushin Thunder Liger in the finals. And by the way, these Super J Cup deals became monster tape trading opportunities through the mid 90s. These were the most sought after tapes. He ultimately receives a shot at the IWGP Junior Heavyweight Championship, the Great Sasuke, at the Skydiving J, but loses the match. He, Dean, Benoit, Too Cold Scorpio, Sean Waltman, they're all tight with each other during the time, partying at night and wrestling during the day. And these matches, you know, as I said, become legendary amongst tape traders. Was anyone in the company paying attention to that? Look, would this have been something on Howard Finkel's radar, or does this just fly under the radar?
This may be something that Howard might have watched. I really don't know. It was during this time, especially, there was more of an emphasis on larger athletes, and the junior heavyweight wasn't something that we were really looking to expand in at the time. So it was, okay, great. You know, just kind of looked at as this was Japanese wrestling, or this was the AAA wrestling and things like that.
Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell so you get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And go save yourself some money right now. If you're in a 30-year loan or you have credit card debt, it's not a matter of if I can save you money. It's a matter of how much. Find out right now for free at SaveWithConrad.com.